So welcome all. Thanks again for taking time out of your day to learn a little bit about the Smart Citizen Science Initiative. I'm Max Herzog. I'm a program manager with Cleveland Water Alliance, and I'll be kind of leading today's session. Just a couple of housekeeping notes. We will be keeping everyone in attendance muted throughout the course of the webinar, just to cut down on crosstalk, obviously. That said, feel free to enter your questions in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. You should see it's like two little chat bubbles. You can also enter things in the chat if that's easier for you, and feel free to be doing that throughout. We'll have plenty of time for question and answer at the end, and I'll be kind of sifting back through those questions when we get to that point. Also, if you do experience any technical difficulties throughout the course of this session, feel free to submit that to the chat or message it directly to Savannah Tracy, our communications manager here at CWA. She'll be standing by to assist you if you do have any trouble viewing the screen or hearing the audio. Please let her know. With that, we're just gonna kind of get things kicked off here, and it's my great pleasure to invite Stephen Love from the Cleveland Foundation to just kind of kick things off with a couple of comments. I'm unmuting Stephen now. Stephen, let me know if you're having any trouble here. Can you speak and let us hear you?
Great. Can you hear me, Max?
Yes, you're coming through loud and clear. Thanks, Stephen.
Perfect. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stephen Love. I'm a program manager of environmental initiatives at the Cleveland Foundation. And just to give you a little bit of context, the Lake Erie Smart Citizen Science Initiative is really the product of over 2 years of planning and stakeholder engagement. This effort began with a relatively simple question posed by the Council of Michigan Foundations a few years ago. How could Great Lakes community foundations come together to address shared environmental challenges, issues like stormwater management, algal blooms, nutrient pollution, invasive species across the Great Lakes region? Well, with funding from the Great Lakes Protection Fund, community foundations across the Lake Erie Basin, 7 in total, including Southeast Michigan, Toledo, Erie County, Lorain County, Cleveland, Chautauqua, and Buffalo. Again, these are communities with distinct issues and capacities and opportunities, came together to answer this question. And ultimately, through that process, they identified an issue of really what it would look like to provide better and expanded monitoring capability and capacity around nutrient pollution as our shared focus area and shared area of impact. But the question was certainly how this could be done. And at the same time, how could we also expand as part of that effort participation from broader communities in citizen science, noting that many of our volunteer monitoring programs tend to be aging and predominantly white in this space. We'll enter the Cleveland Water Alliance as a clear partner with experience in advancing water monitoring innovations and citizen science through the Erie Hack competition series, including support for development of the handheld spectrometer, which I'm sure Max and team will discuss at length this afternoon, along with their strong networks and relationships with research and data partners. The Water Alliance really became the clear partner to serve as an intermediary and coordinator of the Smart Citizen Science Initiative, and certainly in partnership with all of our community stakeholders, who many of whom are on the call this afternoon. Certainly couldn't do that effort without all of you. But really on behalf of the Lake Erie Community Foundations, I would just want to thank the Water Alliance, the partnership of our other foundations, who hopefully a couple other voices will be able to join in on our session this afternoon, but certainly speaking on their behalf for their financial support of the effort, along with the Great Lakes Protection Fund, the Ralph Wilson Foundation, and Council of Michigan Foundations. Again, we're at the Cleveland Foundation very excited to support this effort. And with that, I'll turn it back to Max and team. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much for those words, Stephen. And thanks to the Cleveland Foundation and all of the other funding partners that are on the call today. You'll all see their names quite a few times through the course of this presentation. All right, so with that, I'll go ahead and dive into kind of the meat of the presentation. I'll do a little bit of background, sort of what brought us to this point, and what then the focus areas of smart citizen science, what we've been working on over the course of this first program year, and wrap up with sort of the next steps, what we're looking at going into 2021 and 2022, and how some of you on the call who may be interested in collaborating in the future might start to get engaged in the process. But to really kind of take it back to the sort of ideological origins, if you will, of the program, we have to look back here in this region to Toledo, Ohio, on August 5th in 2014. And this is a date that I'm sure a lot of folks on the call are familiar with, and for those that aren't, I'm sure you're familiar with the events that transpired on that day. This is a day like too many others in Toledo when folks woke up to see their portion of Lake Erie in the Western Basin looking like this, choked full of harmful algae. However, this day lives on in infamy for reasons beyond that. This is the day that this harmful algae didn't just exist in the lake, but was able to make it undetected through the treatment train of the drinking water plant, and resulted in the release of a do not drink order for Toledo and the surrounding counties. This do not drink order and this overall kind of phenomenon ended up denying over 500,000 people in this area access to public drinking water for 3 days. This is what's known, obviously, as the Toledo water crisis. And this crisis and the bloom throughout the rest of that summer had a poignant impact on the economic capacity of the region, about a $65 million hit just that summer from the bloom. Just a little bit of background for those that might be less familiar, although I'm sure a lot of you on the call know this by heart. What really drives these blooms is nutrient loading of our waterways. And here in the Lake Erie region, the primary driver of that nutrient loading is agricultural runoff, the runoff of fertilizers that are applied to our agricultural fields, taken by stormwater into our waterways and eventually concentrated in Lake Erie itself. Now, these nutrients are obviously essential inputs for the growth of life. They're extremely important to driving crop productivity, but in high concentrations in open water bodies, they can cause the growth of harmful algae or blue-green algae, which is actually a bacteria that can produce toxins harmful to humans as well as other forms of life. And this issue is not just an issue in Toledo. Harmful algae threatens communities across the Lake Erie region. Obviously, there are the really high-profile blooms that we see in the western and in some cases increasingly the central basins of Lake Erie, pictured there in the bottom to your right. But there's also growing risk that we see in the eastern basin of the lake, particularly driven by increased intensity of storm events, really driving the loads and surges of loads across the region. And there are a variety of impacts that we see from harmful algae in terms of how our communities feel this phenomenon. There's of course the human health risk. We're very happy that following that 2014 event, our drinking water treatment infrastructure and the great folks that operate that infrastructure have done an amazing job of making sure that we don't see that direct do not drink orders needing to be issued. But there's a variety of aspects of potential human health risks that are still being investigated. This also really drives increased distrust of public water. An event like 2014 really kind of drives home for folks a lot of suspicions about, the quality of our drinking water, whether founded or unfounded. And we know that both these health risks, as well as the distrust component and kind of the disconnect between our drinking water infrastructure and our communities, are most heavily felt on our most vulnerable communities, low-income communities and communities of color. So these are really poignant issues for us to be addressing. And as I said, this is a truly regional challenge. Looking purely from an economic perspective, it's anticipated that over the next 30 years, if harmful algae is left unchecked, the Lake Erie region will see a net negative economic impact of at least $1.5 billion. And there are many folks who think that this number may in fact be underestimated significantly. But these are really, large areas of the economy that are going to be hit and continue to be hit by this phenomena. These impacts are felt in places like recreation and tourism. Obviously, most folks think in terms of the economic impacts, just the fact that folks won't want to go out on the water or visit areas where the water is contaminated in this way. But it also has really large impacts on property value, impacting shoreline properties, private and public, across the Lake Erie region. And of course, to a lesser extent, in terms of the actual economic impact, but in a really poignant way in terms of the capacity of these systems, treating harmful algae can be a stressor on water treatment systems. And all of these impacts have really, driven a large degree of action across the region. Perhaps most notably, the goal shared by the state of Michigan, the state of Ohio, and the province of Ontario of reducing phosphorus pollution, the nutrient that's the primary driver of the Western and Central Basin bloom, by 40% by 2025. And so, we do see the willingness to address this issue at the high levels across our region. But with this regional problem, we really need a truly regional solution. And this is how, this issue started to connect with the Smart Citizen Science Initiative. As Stephen talked about, there was an effort spearheaded by the Council of Michigan Foundations, the Ralph C. Wilson Foundation, and the Great Lakes Protection Fund to bring together Great Lakes community foundations to address our water issues as a coalition of communities. And around Lake Erie, we're extremely fortunate to have had 7 community foundations answer the call to action, as well as some additional sponsors that have gotten engaged since the inception of the program. And these groups kind of came together to ask the question, how can we, as a coalition of Lake Erie communities, address this regional water quality challenge? So these foundations and funding partners pulled together a set of experts to advise on what the best focus area for these communities to dive into might be. And as Stephen mentioned, it was a long and arduous process, making sure that we strategized where we invest our effort and the funds that these foundations are bringing to the table. And the output of that was really a focus on data collection. The idea that without sufficient data on nutrient loading, it would be difficult to assess progress towards that 40% reduction goal. It would be difficult to assess the efficiency of individual investments in nutrient mitigation, and difficult to establish the fundamental kind of returns on investment needed for entities like the states and province to justify the funds that need to be allocated into this space. And this is when, this group brought in us at the Cleveland Water Alliance. And for those who are not familiar with our work, we're a nonprofit economic development organization based in Cleveland, but working across the Lake Erie region, Detroit to Buffalo. And our focus is really on innovative technologies in water, looking at how the cutting edge of data technology and other forms of innovation can positively impact the water quality issues that Lake Erie communities face. And this question of how we can drive increased data collection, particularly around the nutrient harmful algae bloom issue, has been one that we've been working on for a couple of years now. It really fits into a broader set of programs that we've been working on for about 2 years that we call the Smart Lake Initiative. And the idea here is really to apply some of the less philosophical lessons and best practice technologies from the Smart Cities movement, things like highly distributed data collection, big data analytics, and applying these tools for community benefit, taking these lessons and really looking at how they apply to surface water management, and particularly surface water management across a large region with a number of participating communities. And so with this sort of Smart Lake vision already in place and this network of communities ready to get to work, we sort of had to ask the question, what are the existing assets? What can we leverage to really give these 7 communities a problem set to work on and a path towards impact? And after looking locally at kind of the local organizational ecosystems, a really consistent theme came through. And that was that all of these communities had a lot of people, everyday people, who cared very deeply about the lake and their water resources. People who were willing to dedicate their own time outside of their professional lives, outside of their personal lives, to have a positive impact on their water resources. And beyond just these people, there were existing really robust organizations that were harnessing that energy, harnessing the energy of these people who care, to collect really critical data about what was going on in the watersheds and the open lake, and really develop out some of this data infrastructure that we had been envisioning. And so these are all groups that had existing programs that use volunteers to monitor Lake Erie and its watersheds. And some of these programs have been in existence for longer than a decade, really collecting robust sets of data here. And so the question became, how can we use this region level activation to push the volunteer monitoring, the citizen science that these organizations are already doing to the next level? And it shaped up to be, a vision for a 3-year program, 2020 to 2022, that would support these volunteer water quality monitoring programs and accelerate their efforts. We would do this by equipping volunteers with new and innovative tools, both technical and organizational. We would engage these kind of existing programs to organize them into a cohesive regional movement. And the way that we're pushing towards this is through 3 kind of core pillars of action. There are a lot of different aspects to the program, and we're framing them around these kind of core pillars. The first pillar is creating hubs of citizen science innovation. And for us at Cleveland Water Alliance, we always approach things from 2 perspectives, collaboration and innovation. And we knew that technology had to be a really big focus of this program. And so the first component and the thing that really brought us to the idea of quote unquote smart citizen science was the capacity to distribute field devices to volunteers across the region that would allow them to monitor key contaminants, either that they didn't have the capacity to monitor before at all, or that they didn't have the capacity to monitor for in a cost-efficient way. And so the first of those devices that we're pushing out through this program, you can see pictured on your right here. This is the Erie Open Spectrometer from Erie Open Systems, a startup out of the University of Akron that was a winner in our 2017 Erie Hack program. This device is a low-cost 3D printed and laser cut spectrophotometer that monitors for nitrate and phosphate. It executes kind of a basic chemical reaction, and then using a cell phone application, smartphone application, analyzes the wavelengths of light off of that reaction to measure nitrate and phosphate, these kind of core nutrients that drive the harmful algae bloom problem. So we've been in the process of sort of rolling this first device out across partners this year, and I'll talk a little bit more about what that process has looked like in a moment. But the idea here is not just to have this Erie Open Systems device, but to look at how we can leverage the organizational infrastructure all these programs have in place to continue to push out new waves of devices that can bring value to these monitoring programs. So that's kind of the first component of the innovation hubs, those actual field devices. The second key component that we knew we wanted to focus on is standing up a shared data hub for these volunteer programs. Because all of these programs have sort of developed their use case for their specific context, created their own best practices, everyone has a little bit different ways of reporting and managing their data. And so we're really excited through this program to partner with the Chesapeake Commons and their product Water Reporter to bring all these groups together into a common hub so that the data can start to be considered more at the regional level and be served and visualized in an easily accessible data hub that the community can access. And then finally, we're looking at developing a set of educational tools that can help our local partners engage a broader set of volunteers and participants. So that's kind of the first pillar that we're looking at. The second pillar is really focused on increasing the usability of the data that these programs are producing. And really the cornerstone of this effort we're hoping to dive into in this coming year, which is working with citizen science groups to standardize the methods used to collect a variety of the data parameters that they work with. This really gets to trying to create a sense of a regional movement with a common set of methods that can be considered more credible from the perspective of data users. Specifically looking at how these standardized methods can make a more robust data set that is credible to both folks in the research realm as well as decision makers. And of course, we also want to work to support the really important work that these volunteer groups are already doing, serving as a key resource for community level information. And a lot of these groups, I should say, also are doing really great engagement with the research and policymaker stakeholder groups. But we believe that an effort to sort of harmonize that engagement across the region will really push the legitimacy and usability of citizen science data to the next level. The last kind of pillar of action that we're focusing on is more around partnerships and collaboration, what we're calling driving synergy and equity in the community. A big component of this is really looking at each of our 7 communities and identifying opportunities for collaboration between programs within that community. In a lot of our partner spaces, there are a really rich ecosystem of groups that are engaged in water quality, in volunteer convening and action, as well as, in a lot of cases, actually a large number of groups engaged in water-based citizen science. And so identifying opportunities for these groups to synergize with one another is really an opportunity to drive this ecosystem to the next level. We're also really interested in looking at how we can engage more diverse participation in water-based citizen science. As Stephen said at the beginning of the presentation, we see some really strong demographic trends in terms of participation. It tends to be a pretty gray group, often driven by retirees, as well as a pretty white group, as we see not just in citizen science, but across the environmental movement in a lot of cases. And so we're actually engaged right now at Cleveland Water Alliance in a research project to develop a set of programmatic recommendations for how to make water-based citizen science more relevant and of more interest to communities that are traditionally not included in these kinds of programs. And finally, we're looking at not just how can we increase collaboration within each of our communities, but between them. How can we use the most robust of these volunteer programs as kind of champions that are able to, determine together the regional opportunities and really chart kind of the strategy for how we advance as a region this area of work. So those are kind of the three core pillars. Again, to rehash, there's sort of the technical component, there's the engagement of the data with users and driving legitimacy and credibility of the data. And then there's driving this kind of collaboration and synergy between partners and including communities that are traditionally or have traditionally not been involved. So the question becomes, how are these pillars of action going to actually be implemented? And that's really where those existing organizations that I talked about earlier have the chance to shine. These groups have been doing this work on the ground for years. They have, existing staff, organizational infrastructure. They have really loyal volunteers who've been volunteering for years in some cases. And so they're perfectly positioned to both lead this movement from an intellectual and best practices perspective and from an implementation perspective to really bring down the program elements that are being rolled out at the regional level and develop them for their local contexts. And so we're really proud at Cleveland Water Alliance to be partnering with each of these groups to roll out this program. And we've been partnering now for, I would say, almost 8 months at this point with each of these groups, and are currently wrapping up, or not wrapping up, in the midst of, I should say, our first field season to kind of test out some of these program elements. And our goals for these partnerships are a couple of core areas of impact for these communities. The first is obviously to drive public awareness and action around local and regional water quality issues. As Stephen said, it's one thing to kind of address water quality challenges or drive monitoring in this case, but there's a whole series and set of co-benefits that come into play when you look at robustly engaging the community in that process. And so that kind of empowerment and educational potential are really one of our core priorities here. As I mentioned, engaging traditionally excluded perspectives in the collection and use of water data is something that we really want to prioritize, trying to address both this disparity that we see in citizen science, but also a broader disparity in the environmental movement in general. And of course, at the core, this project is focused on generating essential data that's usable by water managers, decision makers, and researchers. And our hope is that, efforts to standardize data collection methods, pull together data into a common portal that's easy to connect with, will really start to make or expand the set of uses that the data being collected by these programs is leveraged for. And so, as I mentioned, we're now, well into our first program year. And so some of you may be thinking, well, why haven't we heard of this before, or what's been kind of going on over the course of this year? Really, a lot of this year has been sort of scoping out those core action pillars that we talked about, building the organizational infrastructure, partnering with these local organizations, which we're calling our local champions, and then really testing out some of these technical components, as well as beginning to start some of the conversations around broader collaboration. We've been really excited to see the rollout of the Water Reporter data platform, as well as the Erie Open Systems spectrometer over the course of this summer, and we'll be continuing to see those elements develop into early fall. I think, as EOS is concerned, or the spectrometer is concerned, we've gotten a lot of great data collected, as well as a lot of really important information about, the limitations of the technology and some of the things that need to be engaged in development, really highlighting the way that this program is a platform for, or can be a platform for the vetting and development of new technologies in this space. But now, as we're approaching kind of the fall and thinking about, how we analyze the output of this year and begin to scope engagement for next year, we're looking towards how we can expand the engagement that we've had. This year has been really focused on developing kind of the core funding base with this great partnership with the community foundations and other funding partners, as well as developing the program implementation side with these core local champions. But now we feel ready to start to have conversations with other folks and really think about, how this program might expand into the next 2 years. And looking forward, we have a couple of priorities that we're thinking of, diving into. The first, as I mentioned, is looking at other technologies. And, if anyone on the call, knows of or has developed field technologies that might be of interest to these groups, be extremely interested to talk to you. Generally, we're looking for easy to use, low cost devices that collect water quality parameters relevant to these groups. And we think that this program can continue to serve as a platform for rolling out those new technologies. We're also starting to evaluate more intensively opportunities for STEM learning around the Erie Open Systems spec. We think there's a lot of potential for STEM learning, particularly around the open source nature of its development. But we're also really interested in engagement from a computer science perspective with the data platform and data analysis sides of things. As I mentioned, we're looking now towards engaging additional collaborators, and I'll talk more about that in the next few slides. And we're looking towards, what it will really take to robustly connect this data being collected to, again, data users in the research and decision maker realm. And these are some big processes that we're looking to dive into in the coming 2 years. So hopefully at this point, you guys all are extremely interested in the project, and you're wondering, how you can get engaged at this point. And there are a couple of paths towards engagement over the next few months. The first, obviously, is as a resident of your community, you can volunteer with your local champion. Now, this looks a little different, obviously, this year and in a COVID-19 environment than it has in the past. Some of our partners are still not working with volunteers in the field because of state level restrictions, while others are starting to work through processes for scaled down engagement with volunteers. But if you are interested in getting engaged, I'm sure our local champions would be interested in hearing from you. Just know that right now the environment looks a little different than it will going forward. The next piece, which I'll talk about a little more on the next slide, is completing our interest survey. And this is really more targeted at organizations that are interested in partnering. As I mentioned, what we're trying to do right now is kind of scope out what expanded partnership or collaboration could look like. We really need to know sort of how many different organizations are out there that would be interested in getting engaged in this project. What is their capacity? What are their needs? And what types of organizations exist across the region that might want to partner? And so, following this webinar, we're going to be diving into this process of sort of scoping out what expanded partnership should look like. If you're actually, a technologist or a startup company or a technology producer or distributor, we're very interested to hear about any technologies that you might have that would be relevant to this program, potential to distribute through this network. And finally, we'd really encourage you as we continue to build out our engagement with the Water Reporter platform over the next couple of months to check out this data, particularly if you're a data scientist or a data user. We're very interested in finding applications for this data in the real world. And of course, you can engage with us on social media. We're on Twitter at CLE H2O Alliance. We're actually beginning a series of blog posts that cover sort of the lives and perspectives of different volunteers and staff engaged in citizen science. And we really encourage you to get engaged in this way. It might seem a little less concrete than actually going out and collecting data or evaluating how your organization can partner with the program. But one of the really big values we hope to see from this is really starting to build a narrative of a movement, looking at not just I'm volunteering with Cleveland Metro Parks or with the Buffalo Niagara Waterkeeper, but I'm part of, the Lake Erie Citizen Science Network. I'm part of Smart Citizen Science. And social media is a really important component of developing that sort of group identity. So to dive a little bit deeper into the organizational interest survey, I'm just going to check my time real quick. Okay, we're doing fine. This is really, for a lot of you, probably the next step in terms of getting engaged with us. The goal of the organizational interest survey, or the format of it, perhaps is a better way of saying it, is to engage you with your local champion, those existing monitoring programs across the region. And it's a method for your local champion to really learn from you about your existing programming. If you're currently doing volunteer monitoring, we have a very robust set of questions to kind of develop a strong understanding of what it is you're currently doing. But if you're more generally interested in partnering, we want to figure out kind of what that might look like from your perspective. We want to understand what your needs are, the best way that this program can support your goals and the goals of your partners. And the goal is to synthesize all this information together coming into the fall of this year so that we can use it in our planning for 2021 as well as 2022. And in fact, if you're on this webinar, you may already be kind of on our list of potential partners. And so there's a chance that your local champion may reach out to you to have these conversations. And so you might be asking yourself, well, I'm interested in this program, but I'm not sure if I'm really, supposed to participate in this interest survey. And we have a couple of different ideas of types of groups we'd like to really interview and understand sort of your perspective in all of this. Obviously, existing volunteer water quality monitoring programs are of huge interest to us. We really hope to have conversations with every group across the region that's doing this kind of work so that we get the most robust picture of the space as possible. We're also really interested in other citizen science groups or other volunteer programs that might be interested in exploring water monitoring. Whether that's an Audubon Society that does citizen science already, but is interested in experimenting with water quality monitoring, or a local volunteering program that might do beach cleanups and wants to integrate monitoring into that component. We want to get a sense for how many groups like that there may be out there and what their perspective is looking like. We're also really interested in engaging educators, schools, and school districts. As I said, we think there's a huge STEM opportunity here, as well as an environmental science one. And we want to make sure that we're engaging all of the folks that really are doing robust programming in this area, have students that are excited about this kind of work, and think through how we can partner you with your local champions to integrate aspects of this program in the classroom. And finally, we're interested in higher education institutions from a couple of perspectives. Obviously, in terms of how the data can be used for research and leveraged in that way. But we also see, engaging undergraduates or graduate students in volunteering programs as a big potential growth opportunity. And so we're excited to hear from you as well. And finally, the last group we scoped out is sort of, again, the folks that might be developing devices that we could be distributing through this process. And the last piece I want to talk through is, if you fit into one of these categories, or even if you don't and you feel that you might bring value to the program, why might you participate in this interest survey, and why might you be interested in getting engaged in this program at all? The first reason is to connect with local partners. I emphasized earlier that we really hope that this whole program over the next, two and change years will help to drive connectivity within local partnership ecosystems, bringing folks together that might not have worked together before around a common interest. This is really your opportunity, by giving us your perspective to shape the trajectory of this project, which we really hope to be a regional movement that will scale impact well beyond 2022, when this initial kind of scope runs its course. And of course, this is the best way for you to get engaged and position yourself for access to program benefits in the future, whether that's equipment, funding, educational tools, communication support. This is all sort of needs to be scoped out, what this looks like in 21-22. And by participating in this survey, you'll have a chance to shape what that looks like. And so with that, I just want to close by saying, for a lot of folks who don't see these groups active every day, these water warriors, these volunteer groups are still working. In a lot of cases, it's been staff that have had to support this kind of core monitoring in a scaled back way during the COVID-19 pandemic. But even now, there are some volunteers that are engaged, in collecting data in a socially distanced manner. And we hope to be able to grow that in a safe way as we move forward. So with that, I'd like to thank again all of our sponsors for making this program possible. It's been a really incredible first year so far. We're really excited to finish it out, and we're really excited to be able to move forward in partnership with many of you. And I want to thank you as well for taking time out of your day for yet another Zoom call. I know it's all too common for us and dominates so much of our lives right now, but I'm really excited about the progress that we've been able to make with this program, even in a COVID environment. And I hope that we'll be able to work together on it as we move forward. Last thought before wrapping up and moving over to questions, we actually have another webinar related to this topic tomorrow. And this will be focused on Water Reporter, the data platform that we're using. So if you have interest in that, Savannah, our communications manager, will be dropping the link to the webinar in the chat. So please, click on that. Feel free to reach out to us as well for more information, but it should be a really interesting session. It's a really great set of tools for folks interested in sharing data, as well as kind of engaging communities in water quality through social media and other kind of aspects there. So with that, I'd like to share my email. Feel free to reach out to me there. And I believe, yeah, we have about 10 minutes still for question and answer. So if you haven't submitted your questions yet, please do so. I'm jumping out to the Q&A. Judy asked if there's a local champion currently in Lake County. The short answer to that is no, there's not currently a local champion in Lake County. One of the things that we are certainly interested in doing in the future is adding additional communities to this network. However, in order to do that, we want to make sure that we're able to provide adequate resources to that partner. So Judy, if you have a local champion in mind, we'd be certainly happy to have conversations with them. And if there's ways for them to get engaged in some of the other communities, we'd be happy to have that conversation as well. There's a couple of questions here coming in from Laura. Will we be sampling macroinvertebrate communities as well? Is the first one. And the answer to that is a number of our participating local champions are sampling macroinvertebrates. We're figuring out what that might look like in terms of listing it on Water Reporter. But that obviously is a really important set of data to be collecting. And as we start to dive into standardizing collection methods across the partners, be very interested in your perspective on the best approaches to collecting that kind of data. Let's see. How do we access your data on Water Reporter? Right now, we have links that we can share with you. By the end, this is coming from Kate, excuse me. Right now, we have links that we can share with you if you reach out to us by email. Pretty shortly, I would say in the next month and a half, we should have plugins listed on the Cleveland Water Alliance website, and we'll be working with our local champions to stand up that for them as well if they'd like, where you can see the visualizations of the data themselves. But I'm happy to send some of those links in the follow-up if that's of interest. Hold on, a couple more questions coming in here. Local champion in the Port Clinton area, a couple of questions about different locations that might be able to get involved. I believe, I may be incorrect in saying this, that Port Clinton is in Erie County in Ohio, and we do have an Erie County partner. I know it's listed as Sandusky on the map here, but it's actually Erie County. And so if you're interested in getting involved in that space, our partners are the Erie County Soil Water Conservation District, as well as Old Woman Creek National Estuarine Research Reserve. But if you're interested in collecting data in Port Clinton, there may be ways that we can engage with that as well. Madison asked the question, where do volunteers collect the data? Is it strictly in Lake Erie or tributaries or sub-watersheds? Right now, as it stands, most of the data is actually collected in the watersheds, not on the open lake itself. Most of these programs that exist are kind of focused on monitoring those tributaries into Lake Erie. Jill asked where we do the survey. One of the things that we'll be sending out as follow-up to this is some of the contact information for our local champions as well as for myself. And so if you're interested in completing the survey, please reach out to us there and we'll share that information with you. Thanks for that, Jill. Pat asked to be reminded about the time for tomorrow's Zoom webinar. I believe it's at 2 p.m. Let me check my calendar really quickly, though. That's a great question, Pat. It is. So it's also 2 to 3 p.m. tomorrow. Let's see, other questions coming in here. Oh, they're in the chat as well. I should be looking at. Rich asks if this program is designed for everyday citizens to help out or just established environmental groups. It's a great question, Rich. The way to kind of frame that is this program is designed to help programs that engage with everyday citizens. And so if you want to volunteer with an existing volunteer monitoring group, those are the groups that we kind of partner with. And so, if you want to reach out to us with kind of where you're based, we can connect you with a volunteer monitoring group that we're collaborating with. Are you looking for, another question, are you looking for individuals or organizations? Again, at this point, what we're trying to assess is the scope of organizations that are interested in collaborating. And part of the goal there is to be able to develop sort of a comprehensive list of all these groups so that individuals are more easily able to connect with them. That being said, if you are an individual interested in volunteering, if you want to reach out to us, we can try and connect you to a volunteer monitoring program in your area. What is that? Sorry, I'm just reading through some of these comments here. Another question about how to find your local champion. This is one of the things that we want to develop in our eventual web platform. Once you've kind of gathered information from all of these groups, is to kind of find your local volunteer program tool so that it's easier for folks to connect. Okay, mostly comments here. Maybe you've already considered it from Jim, but what about Canada and areas within the Erie watershed that aren't close by the lake? In terms of Canadian engagement, that's certainly something that we're interested in expanding to in the future, similar to getting additional communities engaged on the Lake Erie side. The main limitation for us has just been finding those collaborating partners. So Jim, if you have thoughts about groups that we might work with on the Canadian side, we'd be happy to have those conversations. In terms of areas within the Erie watershed that aren't close by the lake, you know, that's certainly well within the realm of possibility as well. In fact, you know, I should probably make this map look a little different to make it more clear exactly what this looks like. A lot of our partner organizations have coverage well outside of the actual cities marked here and look more at the county level or multi-county level. So most of these groups do go up fairly far into the tributaries. But of course, there's always the opportunity to expand there. Look at the time here. Okay, we're getting pretty close to time here. So again, you know, I'll be sending a follow-up email in the next couple of days to all the folks who attended this session, excuse me, with kind of next steps, including how you can reach out to your local champion to participate in the interest survey, a recording of the email, and some links to some of our existing water reporter maps. Sounded like there was some interest about that as well. But with that, I'd really like to thank everyone again for taking the time to engage with us today and to participate in this session, and really like to thank again both our funding partners and our implementation partners, our local champions. It's really been a truly collaborative effort over the last couple of years to get this program stood up, and over this past year to really pilot a lot of its elements. And so I can't thank everyone enough for all the hard work that's gone into this point. With that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this session, and I'd like to wish you all a great rest of your day going into a great weekend. Thanks very much, and talk to you all later.